Okay, fantastic. We are in business. All right, you ready to rock and roll, Daniel?
Let's do it.
All right, Daniel with a no last name and C with a no last name. Okay, Daniel, I'm gonna introduce you to the folks that's listening right now and listening later, and so they know who you are because all we know right now is that you're a really super serious internet guy who wears a uniform of orange. But let me say a little bit more about that, and we'll go into why you're so super serious. So you are really, right now, you're a chief innovation officer, but beforehand, you once opened the AWS web console and you're like now totally an expert in hacking AWS, which I feel like is part of your kind of brand story in effects. I would love to hear more about that because you wrote the first authoritative AWS like hacking framework, which is pretty big deal. You're no longer the chief information security officer at Linktree, nor the head of security at Atlassian, but you believe your spirit lives in awful Python code that no one can understand. Is that still true? Is that accurate?
I think it is. I
And also, you're a advisor to like many different startups, which is actually really interesting. You're an ex-founder too. So everyone who's hearing right now, you're not just C-suite. You like got there. Like you really played the game for a really long time. You created a platform a long time ago. And so you did that a couple of times, and then you went off into this whole world of advisory, and you advise cloud conformity. I'm gonna say this totally wrong. Wishka?
no, you got it right.
Yes, awesome. These startup names are awesome. Eggy, Dashboard at the moment, Fleet Device Management, Human. You're also an advisor at your current company too. So with all that said, though, the thing that really stood out for me as well is when we first met is how you had your time at Atlassian and how you were able to really, because that truly is like fundamentals and the foundations of, working with an incredible amount of talent that brought you up to where you are today in your career and how you're able to have an amazing leadership skill set and be able to lead a team and really push through because you went from CISO to a chief innovation officer, which are like two different things in effect. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? How it kind of changed the playing field for you?
Yeah, Atlassian was great. I think it really changed the trajectory of my life and also my career. And the reason,
Mm.
I didn't understand anything about how business worked, how startup worked, anything before I joined Atlassian. In fact, when I joined Atlassian, they tried to offer me lots of equity. And I was like, why are you giving, what is this? Shares? Like, this is pretend money. Just pay me more. And obviously Atlassian, I joined a long time ago, so it did very well from
Yeah.
there and I did very well. But so like, that's what started me on the journey of understanding how, the tech startup scene works, how equity works, how businesses run, all of that good stuff. And so I really do feel lucky because it was an inflection point and then I got to, have other experiences going forward from there. Yeah.
Who was a good friend to you back then who explained to you what equity actually meant being a nine to fiver? And that was the first time they opened the door and you're like, what the hell is this? Because there's a lot of engineers out there that like not really quite sure what that means. They're like, well, should I negotiate more of this and this and that?
Especially in Australia. In Australia, like the default is you do your 9 to 5. Equity's not a thing. More so now with like bigger businesses like Canva and Atlassian popping up, but definitely back then it wasn't. Everyone worked at a bank or a consultancy or something, so you just got your salary. Look, no one taught me about it. The recruiter who recruited me was like um, was very inspirational about it, but it didn't land with me. Like I didn't understand it. I was just pay me more. Literally, that's what I said. Pay me more. Like why are you giving me this?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't only until after Atlassian went public and after it started to do well that I looked in my share portfolio account, whatever it was, and then saw there were like big numbers in there that I went, hang on a second, this actually is like useful.
Yeah.
And then people internally, like if you're in that kind of rocket ship situation, people internally start talking about it in their Slack channels, and you start conversing, and it starts becoming meaningful. And so you naturally take an interest from there because you're making more money.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what really, to your point of inflection point, you're like, okay, maybe there's something really here in this startup ecosystem thing, which I think this is why we connect really well, because seeing the growth of a startup go into like maturity mode, for them to be growing, for you to be able to like see how the business transformation actually changed. So like for me, my relationship have lasted like since the days when trying to acquire Tempo. And so like, what the fuck is that? It was so long ago. But it's amazing to be able to experience that and like, oh, this is real. But I think when in early stage startups, you know, with R&D and they're really heavy in the R&D side of it, it's really hard to tell because it's quite a roller coaster effect. But for you to have seen, you know, what success looks like, help me understand your advisory side of it. What's kind of your approach? Because you're not just advising one company, two company, three companies kind of thing. And what's your methodology in the pattern that you're trying to really disseminate in effect of the standard that you saw that were like these little tidbits? That's what made Atlassian, for example, really successful because you were in it. You were in that successful environment.
Yeah, so it's a really strange situation. So I actually start out as a security advisor in most of the companies that I advise. But because I've been on all these various different journeys that you mentioned at the start of this recording, which, you know, I've tried to build my own businesses. I've been an Atlassian on the rocket ship. I've been at Linktree. I've been at various positions. Like, and I start being a security advisor, and then I'll see that the team's doing something that like I think they could optimize. For example, I worked with an organization that like they stopped sort of focusing on their product, or the way that they messaged to their employees was, hey, we're going to sell X, Y, and Z so we can get this kind of outcome in terms of an acquisition. And they started investing more and more in the sales side of the business and less in the product side of the business, when the thing that originally like got them to the position that they were was they were building a great product. And so I start to see these kinds of patterns, and my roles tend to transform from like a security advisory role to kind of a general advisor role, or
Oh,
maybe leadership or team building. Since I built security teams all over the place, I kind of know the patterns of building security teams, but they're not like humans are humans, right? The way that I
yeah.
talk to you might be the same the way that I talk to someone else, right? And so
Yeah.
like just seeing that way, like, because founders, like, they're really inexperienced. They're kind of going through the same journey that I did at Atlassian, right? Like they don't, you know, the first time founders, they don't know how to run a company. They don't know how to build a team. They had a great idea. They started building something. They got some traction. They got some money. And now they're like, holy shit, I'm running a business, right? What do I do? And so like having someone like myself or whoever, an experienced advisor who's been through these kinds of things, like they can learn a lot along the way. And I think, yeah, if someone wants to become an advisor, one of the best things they can do is not just be the one thing that they're giving advice for, is like being well-rounded, learning lots of things, and then helping in lots of other ways. And that's how you bring sort of value to the business.
I love that. So, how are you? That's really interesting that you touched on. It's kind of opposite. So, PMF. Let's talk about PMF for a second. So there is a balancing act on like, okay, there's like the sales and then the product side, but you were specifically talking about they already had the sales going on. And at that point, it was really just customer retention and multiplying at that. That was the point that you're really helping at for that specific organization.
Yeah, but also for them, for this one, the way that they were messaging it to the employees was, in my opinion, really unproductive. Like you
Help me
want
understand.
people, I mean, people talk about having mission-driven companies, right? If your
Yeah.
mission is make more sales, like an engineer turning up to build a product, like, are they connecting with that? Are they going to stay long term? Like, are they going to put in extra hours or extra passion into making that widget just that little bit better? They're probably not, because they're like, the mission is make another sale. But if the mission
Yeah.
is, you know, make the product great, save customers time, like whatever it is, like that's what people get excited about, doing the best work of their lives. At Atlassian, you know, that was a big thing. Like people get excited about that. So it was like, we can't have this. You can't have this kind of messaging internally because you're demotivating your team, and ultimately it's going to make the product worse.
All right. Okay. So that's where you're going. Okay. Great. So I love this topic. I love this so much because you're so right. When I think about selling, especially in the role for a CEO, and which, you know, these founders, which they kind of have to play that, you know, especially if they have 2 or 3 or 1, whichever is the case. You know, the CEO, the role of the CEO, they're always selling. They're not just selling to investors. That's one story. That's the back of the house. Then you have the fucking, you know, side of the house, which is your talent, your staff. And then you have the front of the house, which is the other story. You know, all your users, your customers kind of thing. And I feel like, you know, what you're saying about this mission, it's really hard for founders to be like, oh, you know, the founder CEO, it's very much, you have to have such a big enough mission that they can find themselves in it, like you're saying. But in effect of like how to not have this churn and turnover as well, because of all of the knowledge that is going so fast in startup land, no one's fucking documenting. Like, I am a cheer of a queen, okay? But not, you know, they don't have certain project management disciplines to do that when everything is happening and they have to wear so many hats. And then let's say they fuck off like after a year or something like that, or, you know, whatever the case is, it just wasn't the right match or they didn't feel like it was the right fit, which is always going to happen. But how do you like, what is your advisory in helping with founders and being a better employer to allow for that staff retention to actually be the case?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's any like one size fits all advice. But like one of the things I really enjoy is being transparent and like just so one of the reasons that you might tell your staff that it's that sales are really important and that's the number one thing today is because literally for the survival of the business to get your next round of funding, to get acquired, whatever your goal is, like that is the number one thing you have to sell. So being transparent is important, and like people understanding what the business goals are is important. But the way, like how much you pitch it, the way that you say it is also the times that you express it is also really important. And so like people have to like often people want to know everything about the business. Like there's no company that I've ever been at where you go in and staff say, yeah, we already know too much. Like we know exactly. Like we don't want to know any more about the mission, the strategy. Like everywhere you go,
a t-shirt.
Everywhere you go, staff say we don't know what the strategy is. We don't know what the where the
100%
product. Right?
Who the hell am I supposed to talk to? I was waiting for this person. I thought it was going to be in the all hands that we're going to hear it from. I was waiting, like I thought it was going to be 2 weeks later, and then they never hear it, and then things got moved around. It's over. You think you're over communicating, but you're really not.
But that's the thing. You can't over communicate, and like so, it's to some degree like you want people to know enough where they're just like, there's enough. Like I feel like I know everything. It's not that I actually know everything that's going in the business, but it's like I feel like I've been told enough. I feel like my founder has my best interests at heart. I feel like I kind of know vaguely the direction of the business, and that's the point that you want to get to. But the reality is, like most founders are so busy, they can't do that, and they don't do that communication. You say to them, "When was your last all hands?" and they're like, "Oh, 6 months ago." Like, what have we been doing? Yeah. So, but yeah,
it's just like. Okay, so with your advisory in these startups, what are more some tactical advice would you give to the founders that you have worked with about because a lot of them are probably like engineer based, you know, like a lot of it was product teams. So how do you translate that in the way that it's so important as it's just as important as your API docs? Like how have you been able to translate that in a way that some of these technical founders can take away that like, wow, it's actually that important. Like I should be doing more of that like tomorrow.
So yeah, like it's weird. I don't, like I said, I'm not a general advisor. I sort of turn into being a general advisor, but I start out as a security advisor. And I think talking to everyone as a human, like asking them lots of questions, leading them down that path of like, okay, if you were the employee in your company and you didn't get any information, how would you feel? Or better yet, 3 years ago when you were an employee of a company and your boss didn't talk to you or your boss cancelled one-on-ones or whatever the thing is, how did you feel about that? Right? And it's very, like, all of these things, like, very rarely do I give profound advice, right? Like, it's more just at the right time, getting people to recognize what's important and what's the priority today is like more what you end up finding, is because people are just so focused on the thing that they're doing right now that they can't always see the bigger picture. Some people don't necessarily have the skills, but most people do. They just can't see it at that time.
Well, let me give you some extra credit here. The security advisor to general advisor comment. I think, you being a security advisor and leading security teams, you've known, you've probably been in the pager business, being paged all the time. One. So you have to respond, there's different tiers and such. Second, there's iterative, feedback loops as well already for, any feedback and making things better and just being a bit more responsive. And I feel like you probably have translated some of those skill sets and experience over to the business and people side, because at the end of the day, they're still fucking people, like you said. You can label them whatever you want, but, like you said, depending if you're staff or, investors and partners or, customer, you still have to have that experience, that communication experience to talk to them and for them to know. So let's go into and that was the extra credit. So
Thank you.
Good job on that. I want to touch real quickly on your hacking into AWS thingy, because I feel like that, and plus you being a super serious internet guy, is kind of like your main campaign slogan, like campaign ads. So help me in the world understand a little bit more of what that actually meant to you and what does it mean to you today, just from one internet degenerate to another.
Okay. Let me start with the super serious internet guy thing. I'm just at the point in my career where I use LinkedIn quite a lot, as in, like, I look at what's going on and stuff, and I tend to roll my eyes a lot where people are sort of being disingenuous or putting out a sort of a personal brand that very clearly doesn't match who they are. Like, you can see straight away where someone's just being not themselves or being extremely super serious, but not in the ironic kind of way. And so that's where that came from, where like I was like, I'm sick of this. I just want to be the opposite of that, which is intentionally not super serious. And I think that tends to resonate with people. Like, people message me all the time and go, I love that. I'm so glad you do that. And I do like weird. You used to live in Australia, so you know what Milo is, right?
Yeah.
I do a lot of Milo related content.
Skill. That's Milo.
So for the
It's quick, everyone in the US, by the way.
Yeah, but much better than Netflix.
Yeah.
But that's sort of like this gag that I've been running. I've got a picture of a Milo tin on my wall in my home. Whenever I do a presentation at a conference, I give out Milo tins to people who ask questions and all of this stuff. But it's part of like, sort of,
You built like a whole freaking character, man.
Yeah, it's a whole freaking character. But it's like it gets people interested. It gets people off guard. It gets them to realize that, like, I'm just some idiot, like, on stage. Like, I don't really know what's going on. Like, I'm just like them. So that's the reason why I do that stuff. And it tends to resonate with people, which is nice. Now, the hacking stuff. So at Atlassian, Atlassian Cloud was built on top of AWS. And I was there from the sort of very beginning where Atlassian realized it needed to go cloud.
Like, oh shit, yeah, we should probably...
And so, like, the reality is that no one knew what the fuck they were doing when we first went cloud. Like, yes, they hired like people in the Bay Area who sort of knew and had some background, but the vast majority of engineers, vast majority of the security people like me knew nothing. And so like the best part of an experience like being on a rocket ship like Atlassian is you learn on the fly.
Yeah.
And you realize how much you can absorb, like just by being the person that goes, oh shit, I don't know anything about this, I better go learn it. Right? Like, so in a big company, someone looks at your resume and goes, you don't know how to do this, and you say, yeah, I don't know how to do this. But on a fast growing company, someone goes, you don't know how to do this, go figure it out. And you go, oh shit, I better figure it out. Like, that's a huge difference. And you get that opportunity.
That's the environment. Yes, that's what I'm used to too. And I feel like you have been able to really understand that it's okay to not just only like learn on the fly, like it almost accelerated your career by like threefold.
Not like 10x.
10x, okay. Sorry.
No, like it, and I'll explain why. Like, I'll connect all of these things together.
Yeah.
But so the thing that I got to do is I got to learn AWS and AWS security when I was doing it. And I didn't do it by like reading books or like seeing what other people did, because mostly that stuff wasn't around, and I don't learn that way anyway. But I just started doing stuff, and I started hacking things and pulling things apart and looking at our logs and all of this kind of stuff. And because I was doing it, I got to build this AWS hacking framework. And then so it was the first one at the time that I did a big presentation at a conference with that. I started presenting more and more at conferences. People started recognizing me as the AWS hacking guy. I got my first advisory gig because I was the AWS hacking guy, and Cloud Conformity was a startup that was doing AWS security, and the founders came over and said, hey, you look like you know what you're doing with AWS security.
And that's why you're an advisor for that startup.
Okay. And so I started advising them. They did very well. They introduced me to a couple of other companies and other founders because they loved the advice that I was giving them, right? And like circling all the way back, now I work for those same founders inside Plerion, which is another cloud security company. I'm Chief Innovation Officer, but really what I'm doing is I'm a marketing guy. I do AWS security research. I write about it. I do podcasts like this, etc. And now like in the sort of AWS security community, like everyone knows me. And so like when there's opportunities to do stuff, people come to me now. And all of this was started because someone came to me and goes, hey, this AWS security stuff, you need to figure it out because we're doing it.
Okay. And you were able to push all the buttons, and you were enabled to be able to push all those buttons, and you had the resource and the I think a high achiever environment that allowed you to do what you need to do.
Yeah, it's a high achiever environment, but also like, what was the other option? There was no other option. You just have to go learn it because Atlassian needs to do it. You need to do it. You're in the team. We're not going to fire you. Just go do it. And right. And so like, I just think like it was such a blessing and such a change in perspective for me. And I think for especially young people, if they have the opportunity to work in a company like that, where they just get thrown in the deep end of the pool, like it's such a blessing. You have no idea what you're going to learn, and you're probably going to learn something different every day, not because like you want to, but just because you have to. Like there's no other way.
Yeah, and the whole hacking side of it, it's really funny because I feel like you just like labeled like 3 personal brand campaigns. You have like yes, like the AWS hacking framework, you know, that was one flag. And then the second one is like the Milo. And then the third one is like the super serious internet guy. I'm liking this. I'm really liking this approach. I hope people can take some notes here of like, oh shoot, this is because and if you can explain this part too, when you were doing a lot of speaking and you're still doing a lot of publicity and being, you know, in public to talk about what you do, help to explain how not just the benefit of you're able to talk in the level in the room and meeting them where they are, but how they can recognize you so then you can hit the message even harder and talk about really important situations, because there's attacks happening like all the time, and like not a lot of people a lot of people and a lot now people who are not in security who have to sign sign the paperwork to increase the security budget and allow for vendors to be able to, you know, participate. How would you talk to folks who are trying to kind of, you know, if you were to provide a mentorship advice of like for them to do something similar, you know, a framework in a way to kind of inspire people to stand up taller and that it's okay to kind of relax a bit because you're really human the way that you are approachable, which is a personality thing. But how can you explain it? It's a skill so that folks that are who are a little bit more introverted can understand that they can overcome it.
Yeah, so much in that question. I don't even know where to start. But I'll start with like being yourself. I know everyone says to be yourself, but the thing is like the vast majority of the time, like I mentor lots of people. I had a guy who recently did some AWS security research at our company. His first time ever, wrote his first blog ever, and the first draft of the blog that he wrote came out like as if he was a robot at a corporate company. Yeah. Like there was nothing in him. It was as if it was like a documentation style in some kind of manual or something like that. And my advice to him was like, how would you say it? Like, think about how you would say it if you were explaining it to your mate and then you write it that way. Yeah. And the reason I say that is like people sense when you're like trying to be something you're not, and the vast majority of time when you're trying to be something you're not, you come off boring, you come off cold, unapproachable, all of these things, and people just don't resonate. And so like, yeah, if someone like being yourself, if you can do that, whatever weird stuff, if you're into Milo, go be into Milo. Like if you're into Dungeons and Dragons, like go dress up as, you know, a dragon or whatever. There's a cloud security podcast guy that wears really bright colors all the time. I just love that. Like, go crazy. People will, if you're being weird and interesting, there'll be some proportion of the crowd that is weird in the same way that you are, or in like an adjacent way, and you'll resonate with them. And so like it just makes it much easier to tell whatever story. So the last conference talk I did was titled "Getting into AWS Security Research as a Noob Cake," and I literally dressed up as a cake and did it, and I looked like a complete idiot. Like it was so silly, but the crowd was like so much easier to work with because they were like, look at this idiot who's dressed as a cake, right? And then like, yeah, the content
but it grabs
was good,
the attention.
Exactly. The whole talk was better because they were like, this guy's a cake. Like, what's he doing? All right. I want to know more.
And also you put down their guards, right? You put their guard down and, you know, security people are so, you know, they're so skeptical, I guess in the most PC way to put it. And so, you know, it's just like an inherent trait that they have. So I feel like the TLDR is like, try to do something that it doesn't feel so stuck up in a way that feels so rigid, and so that they can actually relax and take in the information. And so the information that you're presenting and that you're sharing can be digestible to them, and they have a real takeaway in that moment. And they have that like quality time in effect.
Exactly. And the reality is, if you're doing a talk or if you're doing a podcast like this, people are going to remember one or two things, right? Like they're not going to remember
everything. The feeling.
So you want them to, it's the feeling. So you want them to feel good, and then you want them to be ready to consume that one or two things, and then you're golden after that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. We talked a lot about personal brand and startup advisory and communication. I want us to touch on some the other bullet points that are pretty hard hitting, and that's enterprise sales cycle on the security front of things. Because the thing is like, you know, you have your IT teams, you have your platform engineering teams. But at the end of the day, security, and it depends on which organization, how big the enterprise really is. What is kind of your advisory and how to kind of create this business case for, and I'm not talking about mid-market sales or like SMB sales, I'm talking strictly enterprise sales of like, what is your advisory for these technical founders that they can feel a little bit more confident in and be better prepared?
So for a couple of things up front, I'm not
Yeah.
a sales guy. Like I have never sold anyone something. I've bought lots of enterprise stuff, but I haven't sold.
But let's touch on that is the buyer side of like what you felt from being a buyer on the enterprise side and what you were saying yes and no to.
Yeah.
That experience.
So first of all, I would say product comes first. You have to have a good product that like people want. There's sort of, you can segment markets into, or segment buyers by like how sophisticated they are. There's a certain number of like unsophisticated buyers who like you might hit them up at the right time and like they don't know the market, so they might buy your thing no matter how bad or good the product is. But the vast majority of the market's going to probably understand like what the products are in the segment. And so like your product has to be good. And like a CISO, for example, buying something, they're like, the first thing I do when someone new approaches me and maybe I don't know their product is I go, hey, my CISO friends, have you worked with these guys? Do you know what this product is like? What do you think? And if they say it's shit, the whole thing is a non-starter. Like we're not going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which brings us to the next point, which is like if you do get an in with someone, you start have a conversation with a CISO or whoever, like a buyer, like listen to them. I know this might sound crazy, but listen to them. So I'll share a story where I was trialing 3 separate products of a certain type, and I started the conversation with each of them by saying, "Hey, I'm a technical guy. Please skip all the sales bullshit. I don't want to see your PowerPoints. I don't want to know about your company strategy. I want to know about how the product works, what's important about the product, like how do we integrate it, how do we get the most out of it, and then I'll do my own evaluation within my team and we'll figure it out." And 2 of those companies basically went, "Yes, that's great, we'll do that." And then the very next meeting I had, guess what we did? We listened to their PowerPoint presentation for like an hour. And so like they just didn't listen. But the one that did, the guy said, "Okay, I understand. Let me replay that for you." Replayed it for me. The sales guy basically stopped talking to me. Like he would still call me and whatever if we needed something, but he got one of his sales engineers who really understood the product well. He had all the conversations with me. We didn't do any PowerPoint decks. We got through the trial of the product. Look, it was the best product anyway, but I already had that feeling of like, these people understand me. They've listened to me. They know what my problems are. They're doing it my way, not their way. And so like, hey, if their product was going to be slightly worse than the next one, I probably would have bought that product anyway, because like they care and they listen to me. And so, yeah, that's definitely another thing, is just listen. And then the third thing I would say is enterprise sales takes forever. Like the sales cycle in these things, like in security especially, like could be a year plus. So like you've got to build the relationship, you've got to grind it out, you can't let go early. Like all of the, if you're a nerd founder, like this is going to be awful for you, because like who wants to be having like a year-long conversation?
Someone's gonna change their LinkedIn bio now and be like, "I'm that nerd founder."
But it's
no, you're totally right, though. And but to your second point, though, in how how things have changed as well, and how people are putting the demos a bit more upfront, like having it a bit more accessible and such. So has your way of being a buyer, has that changed, or how you see things of how the buyer should be able to experience it a little bit more earlier in effect, or going straight into the product?
Yeah,
without
I guess
holding back?
No, I've always been that way, and I've always been very direct. So like maybe I'm a little bit unique in that way, But the point still applies. You've got to listen to what if your buyer's not direct, or if your buyer doesn't want a demo, if your buyer wants to go have a lunch and like talk about the industry first, you've got to go do that thing because that's the way that they want to work. But for me, I've always been, yeah, like I want to see the product. I want to understand how it works, like technically how it works. I want to see technically how it integrates, and I want to see like the data about like the pros and cons, how it helps customers and all of that stuff. And if you want to sell to me, you've got to bring all of that
Daniel,
stuff.
I think I lost you.
I'm still here. I can see you. Hello?
Oop. Hey, I think we had like a glitch. Hey, can you hear me okay? Daniel. Can you hear me? No? Hello? I can hear you.
Sorry. I'm back.
It's okay. It's just the ocean, the pond between us. It's okay. Okay, but back to the whole enterprise thing. So, yeah, so so I guess the takeaway for founders who are trying to first build that relationship is really listen to, it's not always going to be your way. So the takeaway is it's not always going to be your way. A buyer, you're one of many different buyer personas. And so whatever you're saying is that you're like one persona type. Someone might want more on the relationship side, like a lunch kind of thing, getting to know you, more on the industry style. Like there's different ways how they like to buy, essentially. Yours is pretty a straight go-getter. And then for the actual buying, going into vendor management, so I think just to help these founders as well to kind of package up a bit better so that it doesn't waste the buyer's time in how you're judging and the criteria of what you're looking for, especially in these enterprise sales cycle. The reason why it takes so long is it has to check a lot of these boxes because it's being integrated in the whole entire organization. So can you speak to that on giving them some tips of just how it would help both sides in effect, especially in security?
Yeah, so I can definitely do it from a security perspective. And obviously the companies I advise sell to enterprises. I think the first time that you hear someone go, hey, do you have an ISO or a SOC 2 or whatever, like all of these security reports, is probably a good time to start thinking about like having that stuff prepared. So you don't want to do that stuff too early because it's a pretty significant investment of time and money to like go get certified for a security certification. And if no one's asking for it, it's kind of like unnecessary. But at some point, you're going to start coming up against customers that will want you to have those things. And the reality is, if your product is good enough, they will find a way to buy your product. You'll just have to give them some sort of guarantee. Like you'll say, my audit date is going to be October 22nd. So you'll have to wait till then, but we can guarantee that we're going to have, like, we're going to do the audit at this time. And most of the time, that's good enough. But sort of after then, once you get those certifications, or once you start to get in that like repeated pattern of the selling and them requesting security information, it might be a security questionnaire, not a certification. Like having those things ready and up front is a really good way to like disarm the person and progress the conversation. Because you're sort of saying, I'm trustworthy. Here's the reason why I'm trustworthy. I know you guys are going to need this stuff later on. We have the ISO, we have the questionnaire completed. We have all this information on our website. I'm going to email it to you just so you have it for later. And that person is going to know, okay, I don't have to worry about, like, they know what they're doing. I don't have to worry about it. Whereas if you're an early stage company, one of the problems you run up against is like people think how long are you going to be around? Like, am I?
Yeah, big
like,
fish and small fish.
yeah, do you have the revenue to be able to stay around? Are you doing security well? Are you handling personal information well? Will my legal team approve this thing? Like, if when I ask them, like, you're considering all of these things, and so like, again, giving the feeling like you have your shit together. Maybe you don't. Like, because a lot of the times you get the certifications, but actually it's still chaos in the background. But you want to sort of
one check mark.
it's one check, but you want to give the feeling like, hey, you might be early, but you belong there and you're trustworthy.
Going to the website from a buyer standpoint, because if you're a looker and need to reference and you have to share across Slack and stuff like that, what exactly would you want to be able to point out in effect for these founders to make sure that they actually prioritize and it's a non-negotiable to help with these long sales cycles?
Yeah, from a security perspective, there's like
that makes them legit.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. There's this general category of trust. Like you don't have to have a lot of information on your website, but it has to look like it's a real business. I think is really important. So no matter what you say, like just make it look at it from your perspective. If you landed here, would you want to buy something from this company or not? Would you want to give them your date of birth and, and like address? Yes or no? If the answer's no, you're probably sort of like, need to do some work. And then I think the other thing is like, that's really useful these days is like, you can get these sort of like, there's a lot of companies that do kind of like a add-on or a hosted part of your website where they host what's known as a trust center, which is usually where you put your like privacy policy, your penetration testing documentation, your ISO certification, all of that kind of security related stuff. And they kind of like help you bundle up all of those things and make it easy so you can just connect it to your website. And it's like a really easy way to get started and build trust for a founder.
Yeah, I feel like you can really kind of tell the different companies when, they have like their ISO badges and stuff like in the footer. You can kind of tell like what stage they're in almost as to why they would have to. But like they find it was like, okay, I'm going to update the footer. Task, let's do it. Because they probably were asked that question so many times, right? But it isn't, so I feel like that's kind of the difference. But I love how you were really transparent and honest about like, if they're not asking for it yet and you're able to slide by in that respect because your product offering was so much more and it hit some other areas kind of thing. I think that's really important for founders to take away, that it's not all about that. There's a specific time when to. So when would you advise founders, when is the right time to actually put that budget aside? Like what is the identifier for you to be like, okay, we got to invest in this?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in just one sec, but I think you hit on something really important.
Sure.
Which I like to generalize to founders is don't solve any problems before they need to be solved, right? Like you have a finite set of like time and money. The only thing that's important is finding product market fit, getting to the next stage of your business, right? Like that's your focus, right? Like making it, whatever making it means for you. And so like every minute you invest in something that's not a problem today is like a misinvested minute because you might not be a business tomorrow, right? And so this comes into that same perspective. And it's like, it's hard for security professionals to hear that because like if you get the wrong security advisor, they'll come in and say, do this right now. You have to hire your first security person. You have to buy this product, blah, 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 blah. But no, the most important thing is like making the next sale, paying your employees for like today, like all of these things. So
yeah.
How does that come back to like, when should you do this like ISO stuff or this trust center stuff? I think when you start to feel the friction in your sales cycle is a really good time to do it. Because again, what I'm
hearing this, like that's everyone.
No, But it depends.
Because it's interesting where we are in the ecosystem as well, because the sales cycle for enterprise is really long. And so the friction to them can mean so many different things. And it's so funny you're saying this too, because you're like, yeah, in the beginning, you're like, I'm not a sales guy. I'm like, you're just even talking straight fucking sales. You gotta give yourself a bit more credit, man.
But yeah, so like, it's again, if you're getting to the point where the thing that might stop you from getting your first sale or the next sale is the security certification, that's a good thing.
It's a great problem to have.
It's a great problem and most founders don't make it to that place. And so that's why you've got to, all the time and energy before then has to be in the product, in the business. Okay, now you're like, someone mentions it, like we might need this if we buy from you. Like that's when you should be starting to put it in your head. But what you absolutely should not be doing, in my humble opinion, is like when you start your company going, okay, well, we'll have to get ISO, so let's start preparing for that. No.
Yeah.
Like have a product that someone wants to buy first before figuring out how to like sell it.
And how do you say that in a prioritized way, especially if a first-time founder, they raised, a few $1 million or something like that, and they think, oh wow, that's like a lot, and it's like really not at an average rate of like 18 months, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like getting people, like for any prioritization thing, I would say is like start making a list and start getting people to order their list. It doesn't matter whether it's a founder deciding what to do with their $2 million round, or like someone trying to figure out what job they want to apply for next or whatever, or an engineer doing the engineering work. Is as soon as you start, like you put a list in front of someone or get them to write the list and start getting them to move the items up and down and saying, this one is actually more important than this one. And people very quickly realize like, it's just like your decisions become a function of where you put stuff on the list.
So I want you to connect that to what you were saying in the very beginning about communication with founder people skills and staff, and talking to staff of where are we going to business, because you're right. Tomorrow it could be a no-go. And what you're trying to do is hit payroll, or you're trying to get those customers that, it's not even, sometimes the problem might not even be recurring revenue. It's just the first revenue part, and how to have a healthy P&L to be able to move forward, not just R&D, but so like, how would you connect that in prioritization? Because that prioritization changes all the time because it's such an adventure. And you never know what's going to, it's a roller coaster, right? So in the same way how you have been able to lead security teams and, from a prioritization standpoint, how do you translate the same urgency or the same framework on the business side?
I mean, I don't think there's a particular trick to it. It's, to me, it's always exactly the same.
Or they just get it or they don't.
Yeah, but like, so let's say today, like, I'm not a founder, so like I won't pretend to walk in their shoes. I've tried it and I sucked at it.
It's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. But let's say my manager, my boss, the CEO and founder of Plerion, comes to me today and goes, "Hey Daniel, I want you to do X," right? And I'm like, that sounds like a dumb idea in my head. Okay, Mike, let's make a list. These are all the things that I'm doing today. This is how important I think they are. Put your thing on my list. Where does it belong? And like, if you just do that simple exercise, like they will make the right decision themselves vast, like 90% of the time, because they have to like, okay, if I put it here, that means Daniel's not going to do the thing that's underneath it. Like, this is the line like of how much time I have. And it just becomes self-evident. And like, so that's why I think that exercise is so powerful.
That was perfect. That is a clip that everyone needs to like share around every single Slack and be like, are you doing that? No, we're not. Okay, so I want to wrap up in this vendor management side of things. That was the point of just from a buyer side, because that is the point of view I think is really, really crucial in these kind of cybersecurity is such a hot market, but at the same time, it's kind of, everyone's like really skeptical and there's a lot there. It can be very saturated as well. And sometimes, someone can wake up with a really just on the wrong side of the bed. Just having a really bad time, and sometimes, and it's just like any interview, it's not all about you. It's also the other person as well, or just the timing wasn't right and all that kind of stuff. But how to give support and encouragement to, how can you let them know or provide advisory of that they've done everything they could. And if their product sucks, then their product sucks, sure. But that they gave it a chance in a way that, when you're qualifying it with your team, behind the scenes, and you're like judging, basically, they check this and this and this and this and this and that, and I'll get back to you. And sometimes when you get rejected and you're saying no, and you don't have the time to tell them actually why, but from a founder standpoint to be like, okay, we really tried everything we could. And let's say even if it was 4 years later that they got a sale, for example, the sale that they really wanted, which is that's a success case study that has happened time and time again. What would you say just for them to understand from a buyer standpoint, because they're so in their head sometimes and not really listening to your point, and halfway to this podcast of like how to really listen to the buyer of how they want to buy software?
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's really hard, and no revolutionary advice here. I would say, yeah, try and keep in touch. Make sure you have a regular cadence and tooling, whatever tooling means for you. A calendar might be the extent of your tooling. Like touching base with whoever the buyer might be, listening to them when they give you an answer. When you finally get told, "Hey, we did a evaluation and this happened." I think being insistent on like getting the reason why, but in a nice way. Like I've had companies come to me and go, "We don't agree with the decision that you made about purchasing our competitor's product. They suck. They're a laughing stock. I can't believe you bought their stuff." That's the absolutely worst.
Wow.
Do not do that. That is awful.
Wow.
And you're going to get blacklisted.
Oh my God.
but insist on, like, in a very mature kind of way, say, "Hey, we're an early stage company. Like as a founder, I want to know what we need to do better to sell, and try and get that information. And then you'll know that, like, most people are pretty, like, if you approach most people as a human, even if they're busy, they're going to help you. Like, and if someone rejected you, they're understanding that they've just ended your sale. Maybe you spent a lot of time on that relationship. So they're going to be thoughtful and be able to explain it to you. And then you'll understand. And take that feedback, like, to heart. Make sure you give them permission to be honest. The last thing you want to do is, like, have that conversation in an adversarial or like stilted tone. You want that person. You want to go to that person and go, "If we were having beers together right now, and you were a little bit tipsy, what would you tell me is the reason this didn't work out?" And you want to have a conversation, because then you want to take that back and you want to, like, work on those things for the next sale, obviously. And you never know. Like, here's the other thing. Like, with networking, you don't know how your network is going to pay off. You don't know when. You don't know how. The one thing you can be sure of is, I think, is if you build a network and you treat people well, at some point that comes back. And that person that just rejected you might move jobs, and your product has moved forward half a year or a year or whatever. They come into their next job and say, "Hey, I had a good experience with you, but didn't buy it last time. What's going on? I need this kind of thing at my next role. Have you made the changes that I wanted you to make?" "Oh, yes, we have. And by the way, let's do a demo." Right? Like, you can have those conversations. So I think that's important.
I think it's really beautiful advice, and I think it wraps up to also the human side of it. It's sometimes, I think, when founders, they they are trying to always it's kind of like this shiny object syndrome in effect, right? As how for them to be focused, but also feeling like it's not a not falling for them in like the cost sunk fallacy kind of side of things as well. Like it's okay if it didn't work out. It may have not even been a good match, but that doesn't mean that later on it's not a good match. It could come around, and it's more like, did I walk into this life and into this person's life, making it better than when I first found them? I feel like, and being just a really good neighbor. And I think it's like, people can come and go at all times, and I think and I just love going back to your whole cake outfit because it really kind of, I think when people are in 9 to 5 in a sense of like they haven't been exposed to the startup world yet, and they're on that side of capitalism in effect, and pre-equity days. um, when they see all these different roles, the hierarchy, the organization, in effect, it's really hard to kind of feel like, for them to kind of break out and be like, oh, but they're like the CEO or the COO or, whoever, whatever. And it's like, no, they're just another person. They just have a specific job, a specific role. And I think mentoring people and helping them understand that and take away that pressure is going to be so helpful for them to understand that we go through so many different acts in life. Like so many seasons. And so it's like they could be, sure, a CISO one day, but the other day they could be an advisor. They could be, like any, head of security or whatever it is. And they could be your next mate, for whatever. They could be next to a neighbor. Who knows? Just keeping that good relations and that networking of just being a really good friend. And I think that deep friendship part is really what you're tapping into of like, be good service and don't be an asshole.
Right? 100%. And it'll pay for itself.
Yeah.
Like, you can do it because you're a good person, and you can also do it because it will eventually come around. If you treat people well, eventually it comes back.
Yeah. I love this conversation. This was awesome. I think, when I think the takeaway I am hoping people will get is that you have your amazing products. There might be some huge, objections, perhaps, especially because security is a really heavy hitting kind of area. So there might be a lot of objections for many different reasons. They might have already other vendors, part of their infrastructure as well. And so it's like, how are they going to go cohabitat almost in effect? And sometimes you might have that information already ready. You might have someone who's leading the team who would already have that answer, or you might have to collaborate and figure that out together. And might have to go through legal as well to make sure there's no competing kind of situation as well. And so I just hope people understand that it's okay to go out there and for them to look at your publications as well and check out all the things that you've done and how you've kind of put yourself out there and being that role model and example to the industry of not just being a general advisor, but a security advisor. Daniel, thank you.
It's been lovely.